Hello, everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. My goal here is to help us all connect, inspire, and create. And every week, a new guest is here to share their story, inspire a little creativity, and help you improve your photography skills. The schedule for upcoming presentations are on my website at lindanickell.com. Under Happiness Hour, you'll find the links to previous episodes on my YouTube channel. Tonight's guest is Liz Crane. Liz joins us from Northern California, and her presentation is going to entice us to put down our big, heavy DSLRs and pull out our camera phones. The snapshots Liz takes with her iPhone are translated into digital art with a few of her favorite apps on her iPad. In her presentation, Playing with Your Phone, Creative Exploration with Mobile Devices. You won't need your fancy cameras or Photoshop, because Liz is going to show you how to create fun photos and unique digital art with just your camera phone. Welcome to the Happiness Hour, Liz.
Thank you, Linda. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. And I'm gonna, before I really let you go, I always like to tell people how did I come across people? Because sometimes it's very random and I just see a photo and then I kind of dig deep and try to find those people. I had attended, actually I moderated out of Chicago, which is a photography conference, and they've been doing them virtually over Zoom the last, year and a half through the pandemic. And this last conference, which was in April, they did something kind of special, and they invited attendees to participate. And I can't remember, we had this conversation last week. There were 6 or 7 speakers that they were given 7 minutes to do kind of like a real quick start to finish presentation. And Paul Malinowski, who was our speaker last week, was one of the speakers who did his on his Luna Quest, his chasing the moon for a solid year. And I don't know if you came after him or how that worked, but you did your presentation and it was on using your phone to create these fantastic, very unique images. They were more like art than they were photos, or the ones that stood out to me. And I always put a pause on, I don't know her and I didn't know him, but I'm just going to ask, and they can say no. And neither one of you did. And I was thrilled that he said yes. And then you did too, like in the same day. And it was really cool. And it was like 6 months ago. So I'm glad to finally have you here. So with that, you're working on a website. So it was really hard to stalk you on your website. So work on that. So
it's on my to-do list.
Oh, good. So if there's something I missed in an introduction that you'd like to share with us, please take the moment to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit how you got started and why you're working with your iPhone versus pulling out a big camera, because I think you have one.
Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and start my presentation because I actually have a little get to know me slide that talks a little bit about that. So hopefully this comes up.
It is. Looks good.
Perfect. All right. So I will start off by saying that I'm an Apple gal. A lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about tonight, you could also do on Androids. There's a few apps I use that are Apple only, but a lot of them exist on both platforms. So I just wanted to give fair warning that I don't know the Android stuff at all because I do not own any Android devices.
That's all right.
So what I'm going to talk about tonight, I'm going to start off just a little bit about me, kind of my story, how I got started in photography, why I ended up doing mostly iPhone stuff. Then I'll talk a little bit about how, phones take good photos too. I think a lot of you here probably know that already, but I'll cover a little bit on that and talk about a few apps that I use that are just general camera apps, not necessarily doing any fancy tricks. Then I'll talk a little bit about, some creative add-on lenses and filters and different creative camera apps that you can use to mimic some of the things that you might be able to do on a big camera. Then I'll get into like my digital art, which that might get a little out there for some of you. I'd encourage you, it's always fun to play. Like, even if you're more of a straight up photographer, like dabble in this stuff. It's like, maybe you're in a creative rut, like just go play around and have fun. And you may not like what you come up with. You may decide, no, I want to go back to landscapes or weddings or whatever it is that you take pictures of. But, it can be a way to sort of explore something that you haven't done before. And then at the end, I'll talk a little bit about some of the ways that I get inspiration for my images, and maybe those will give you some ideas as well. So a little bit about me. So I grew up in Cleveland, so I'm a Midwest gal. I've been in California though for about 20 years. I live in San Francisco Bay Area. This photo here is the bridges that are basically right out my front window. My baby Fletcher, my favorite doggy. And just a little bit about how I got into photography. So I grew up with a mom who like always had a camera in her hand. Like, we would run away from her, like the holidays would come, we would try to hide from her because she always had the camera out. And we would go to the park and she would take endless pictures of, there was the legend of the black squirrel. She would take all these pictures of this black squirrel, and nobody besides her could ever see the black squirrel in the photos. So we always had a good laugh at that. But I think just seeing her with the camera all the time, like photography was just always like, well, that's just something you do. And so as I got older, I had some like point and shoot cameras and things like that. Decided what I really like. I don't like taking pictures of people. So I decided like landscape photography, that's my thing. So I'm like, of course, everyone then aspires to be Ansel Adams. I'm not going to ever get there. But I do enjoy landscape photography. But I think as I realized, like, hey, I really do enjoy photography, and I wanted to find something that would be a little bit different than what everybody else was doing. And so, a lot of my landscapes, I'm like, well, everybody has a picture of Yosemite Falls, or everybody has a picture of, this particular landmark. And, there's a lot of people out there that take much better pictures of those great landmarks than I ever was going to. And so I feel like, while I still, if I go on a trip, I'll still take pictures of, these things with my iPhone or a regular camera. It just wasn't really sparking my passion and my creativity the way I'd hoped. Also, at the same time, my mother was also a very good artist. Like, she does a lot of pastels and colored pencils and things like that. I tend to like more abstract art, but I never could think of anything to create. So it's like, while I know how to paint and things like that, just the idea of like, well, what am I going to paint? I want to do something abstract, but what? And for me, starting with photos sort of gives me that outlet, because then I can play around with it, and then the vision sort of comes to life as I work on it, versus me having to like know right off the top of my head what it's going to look like. So that's a little bit of how I ended up, where I am today. I think also over time, I kept telling myself, oh, I'm going to buy a DSLR. I'm going to buy a DSLR. And then over time, I found I was taking more and better pictures with the iPhone. And then, I discovered I like creating digital art. And I'm like, I don't really need the DSLR. I mean, there's a few things that it can do that I can't do with the iPhone, obviously. But for the most part, I'm happy with the pictures I take, and I always have it with me. I don't have to think to like lug around big camera gear. So that's part, I think that's why I probably at this point never will buy a big camera. I think I'll stick with the good old iPhone. And then I had to put in this picture of turkeys here. So I lived in Dublin, California up until this summer, and they had this nature in our backyard photo contest. And I submitted several pictures, many of which I thought were actually better photos than the turkeys. But I'm like, the turkeys are going to be the ones that have the best chance of winning. And sure enough, I got second place for the turkeys. None of my other photos made the cut at all. So these guys, they were just strutting their stuff and posed nicely for me. I'm like, just total luck. But if I'd wanted to take it with my real camera, it wasn't with me. I was out walking the dog, and all I had was my iPhone. So there you go. Never told the people organizing the contest that I took the photo with my iPhone, and they probably never knew. All right, so now I'm going to shift gears, talk a little bit about just phones can take good photos too. Like I said, I'm sure most of you probably know that, but it's something, I belong to a number of photography groups on Facebook, and there's always people, they'll post something, they'll be like, oh, this is, if only I'd had my real camera, I could have taken a good picture of this. I'm like, well, your picture's not good because it's not because it wasn't taken with a big camera. It's not the iPhone's fault that the picture's bad. It's other things wrong with it that you could have fixed. So I'm going to start with a little interactive quiz here. So out of the 4 pictures on the screen here, if you could put in the chat which one you would guess was not taken with an iPhone. So I do have a real, it's a point and shoot camera, but it has higher resolution than the iPhone. I'll give you that little bit of info. So put in the chat which one you think was not taken with the iPhone. And then I'll let Linda watch
I'm
the guesses
waiting.
for me.
Got some slow typers. Oh goodness. Okay, so D, C. I've got Paul says D, Karen says D, Rose says C, Mika's got B in here. Anybody else? I think they're going pretty fast. More D's in here. There's like Anita says C. So there's a guess from everybody. So
Okay.
Felicia says B. So there's a little bit of everything in here, but I think the most people are going to say D.
All right, and most people are wrong. It was A. So yeah.
And you know what? Actually, I think everybody was wrong because no one said A. Not one person.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, honestly, like I actually went, it's funny because I do have a mix of photos that I've taken with like my Panasonic Lumix and stuff. And sometimes I have to go and look at the EXIF data to remind myself what I took the picture with if it was a trip that I knew I had a real camera with me. Sometimes I don't even remember. So, but yes, all the rest of these, I'm up to the iPhone 13 now. So some of these are some older pictures, but I mean, this one here, that was my old iPhone 6S work phone that I had with me in Death Valley for a trip. And I had a regular camera on this trip too. So I don't know why I took this picture with the iPhone, but I did. And, you know, it turned out nice. And that was like an old iPhone too. And I feel like they've only gotten better as time has gone on. So just goes to show you. And this was the iPhone X. So the X didn't even have the great night mode that the iPhone 11, 12, 13 have. But, you know, I guess I was able to hold my hand still for long enough to get that shot.
Yeah. It's great.
So just a couple things to think about when you're taking pictures with the iPhone. Like, don't forget about composition and lighting and everything just because it's your phone. I think this is probably the people out there who are like, oh, you know, I need a real camera. I can't take good pictures with my phone. I think it's because people are thinking of it as a phone and not a camera. If you think of it as a camera and you think about the lighting and the composition and all the different, you know, the rule of thirds, like all these different principles of photography that you can ignore or not. But it's like, if you have to have that in your mind, if you want to be able to take a good picture. I've also found, you know, the native camera, at least on the iPhone, it does have some controls, like you can adjust your exposure and things a little bit, but there are third-party apps out there that offer you more control. So if you're someone who loves shooting, you know, with all the manual controls and setting your exposure and, you know, ISO and all of that, you can do that with some of these third-party apps. If you do feel like you want to have that little bit more control. And then I'll also just say, you know, Apple, especially like the AI that they use to sort of process the photos that it takes, it's pretty good and it's getting better all the time. But, you know, don't be afraid to edit a little bit because, again, you know, every photo, usually there's like something hidden in the shadows or your highlights are maybe a little bit too bright or you just want to bring something out. I mean, I think if you can see the photo that I have in the bottom corner was the original photo of this tree. And as I was walking up the path to this tree, there was like this lichen all over it and it had these like twisty, gnarly branches. And, you know, that just did not come through in the photo as I took it. And so I just spent a little bit of time in Lightroom and Snapseed and I got it to, you know, look a little bit more like what the feeling that it gave me as I was walking up the path towards it, which is what you see in the main picture here. So I'll pause on here for a minute if you want to screenshot this or anything like that. I'll talk about each of these briefly too. So as I mentioned, the native camera app is great and it's easy to use and it does have, you know, some basic controls. If you want more manual controls, my favorite actually is Pro Camera. So it has all the manual controls. It costs a little bit, I think, if you want. There's like an HDR mode and like a long exposure mode, and they've got a night mode, which I used to use their night mode all the time until Apple got theirs, and now I often use the Apple one. I think they both work about equally well. And then Lightroom, I know you don't think of Lightroom as a camera app, but it actually is. The mobile Lightroom has a camera app as well as the editing. And they both give you more controls and more modes than what you can get with the native camera. And then I'm going to mention one, I don't actually use it a ton, but it's really intriguing because one of the downfalls of phone photography, obviously, is the number of megapixels that you get out. So it's like if you're wanting to print up, giant posters of your photos, the resolution just isn't quite there. That's the one downside that I'm still seeing to the phone versus a regular camera. But Hydra is an interesting camera app. It actually leverages the little bit of like shake in your hands as you're taking a photo. So what it does is it takes a bunch of photos at once, and it looks at, it interpolates pixels based on like your hands move a little bit, even if you're trying to hold the camera really still. And it's able to like put more pixels in as a result. So I thought it's a kind of intriguing app. It doesn't have a lot of other controls, so I don't use it as much. But if you do want, if you're at this like grand landscape and you want this big, it's something to think about. On the editing side, if you don't already have Snapseed and know it, like you must get this program. It is, it's free. It has like a ton of features. I would say like the basic editing features are super easy to figure out and use. It's got some more advanced things like masking, which are a little bit hidden, and you sort of need someone to show you how to do that. But it's such a great program. And quite honestly, like I could probably live with just it. Like if you made me get rid of all the other apps on my phone, that's probably the one I would keep. So Lightroom, I used to be scared of Lightroom, still a little scared of Photoshop, but I've learned how to use Lightroom, at least the mobile one. I haven't really delved into Lightroom Classic on the computer, but it's got a mobile version. It's mostly free. There are some features that you need, like the healing brush and a few things that you need to have the subscription to the Adobe Creative Cloud in order to use, but it's a great editing program as well. Retouch is my favorite. My old house in Dublin, I had telephone wires or electric wires off the back of my, behind the house that would always block my sunset views. And where I live now, I've got electric wires blocking my view of the bridge. So this app is fantastic for removing those electric wires and little extraneous objects that you don't want in your photos. So it's another one I use all the time. And lastly, I'm just going to mention Gigapixel AI. It's not an app. You can't use it on your mobile devices. But again, getting to that, if you want to print things large size and you want to scale up the size of your iPhone photos, that's a great app to invest in. All right, hopefully everybody's screenshotted that by now. I'm going to move on now and talk about creative shooting with apps, lenses, and filters. So long exposure, this is an easy one. You don't need any special equipment. You just need the right camera apps for this. And you don't even actually need a special app. If you have an iPhone, if you take your photos in live mode, after the fact, you can go and it'll do a thing where you can like make it bounce, or you can do like a long exposure. And what it does, it ends up chopping a little bit off the edges of the photo, because it basically is taking a video of a few seconds, like before and after you click the shutter button. And so because you're probably moving a little bit, you always lose a little bit around the edges. So just be aware of that when you're taking those photos. But it does a great job. My favorite is actually Spectre, which is the one that I'm showing here. Both of these pictures were taken with it. It's a little bit inflexible, like it only lets you pick 3 seconds, 6 seconds, or 9 seconds exposure, but I've found it's like the best for smoothing out water. So that's definitely my favorite for that. And here I caught some windblown flowers with it as well. Slow Shutter is another app that will do long exposures, and the Lightroom camera also has that mode on it. Intentional camera movement and multiple exposures, another fun thing that you can do with your phone. So Blurristic is an app that I love. I would say I probably use it the most out of any of my like trick apps. And what it does is you can pick one spot to sort of hold steady, and then you move your phone as you're sort of recording a picture, and it'll keep that one part not moving and make everything else blurred. So you can see in this photo here, the white flowers are what I kept that focus on, and then I moved the camera down, and so you get this sort of cascading effect of the other flowers in the background. For multiple exposures, there's an app called Average Cam Pro, which it's very, very basic. Like it only does this one thing, and half the stuff in it doesn't work. I think they haven't updated it in a while, but what it does is you can set it to take 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 exposures with, and you can set a delay in between. And so here I was trying to do, there's this photographer, Pep Ventosa, who does these in the round multiple exposures. And so I was trying that technique on this vase of flowers. And so I think this is like 8 exposures on the vase of flowers. I manually turned it around in between each shot. Slow shutter also will let you do this. Like you can take a photo, and then if you don't clear it out and you start taking another one, it puts it over top of the one you already had. So in that way, it does multiple exposures. You can also do intentional camera movement with it, because it has, and basically anything usually that has a long exposure, you could do the intentional camera movement. You just move while you're doing that exposure. Lens Baby Mobile. So this one is one of my favorites. This is an add-on lens that you have to buy. Unfortunately, they don't make these anymore. They haven't made them in quite a while. I want to say the one that I bought, like it came with a mount designed for the iPhone 7. So it has not been out in quite a long time, but I managed to pick them up on Amazon a couple of years ago. And so occasionally you can find them, but they let you get these really cool soft focus effects. So I think these two here were taken with the LM10 lens, and this one was with, I believe, the LM30, which does more of a like reflections and reflections kind of effect. But you can get some beautiful effects. But again, like these lenses are hard to find, and I really wish they would go back to making them because they are so fun and cool. Macro and microscope. So you can get up close. A couple ways that you can do this. So the iPhone 13 Pro actually has a really great macro mode. So the photo on the left here, that's the inside of a sunflower done with my iPhone 13. So as you can see, I mean, that's pretty good level of detail there. The middle picture here, I have a Moment 10X macro lens. And so I used that to take this photo of a water drop on the edge of a succulent leaf. And then the far right, it's a little probably less flexible, but I had a 400X. The brand was Ulanzi. I'm sure there's a bazillion others. I didn't really research. I was just kind of playing around and like, ooh, that's not too expensive. So I bought it and played around with it a little bit. But it has to get really flat up on a surface. I think, again, this was like something from the middle of a flower that I was trying to take a picture of. And you can see how it's got a very, very narrow range of focus. If you don't want to buy extra lenses and you don't have an iPhone 13 Pro, the cheat mode is the Camera Plus 2 app. And what this does is it has a macro mode, which actually it takes pictures that I would say are pretty equivalent, maybe not quite as good as what you get with the iPhone 13, but they're pretty good. I would say just don't try to zoom in when you're in the macro mode. It's got a slider to zoom in, but the resolution just gets really crappy if you do too much of that. So I would say, keep it at the resolution, keep it at the zoom, the lowest zoom. Infrared. If you want to learn more about infrared on the iPhone, definitely check out Rad Drew. He's really done a lot to, figure this out. He's got a bunch of webinars and things like that. I had started dabbling in it before I was aware of his stuff, but then when I took one of his webinars, I'm like, oh, well, that's how you get things to turn out nice. So I definitely recommend looking up his stuff if you're interested in this. But yeah, so I had, because I had the Moment lens for my camera, they come with a special case and fittings, and they also sell a filter adapter that will let you attach filters to the iPhone. And so I just bought a 720 nanometer IR filter, and you put that on the adapter, and you can just go take these wonderful infrared photos in black and white. And so it gives you just, another way to get some interesting effects. So I'm going to switch gears then and talk about taking your photos and turning them into art. Linda, unless there are any questions that you feel like we ought to address now.
There was one question. I wasn't quite sure what she was asking, but I'm going to take a stab. She wanted to know how to use live photo. Do you want to take that on?
Yes, except I can only give you directions for how to do it with the iPhone 11. The 13, or I don't know if it's the 13 or if it's the new operating system has changed, like exactly how you find it. But yeah, I was going to demonstrate on my phone, but I'm like, wait, I don't know how to do it on the 13 yet. But basically, so there's a little in the upper like right corner of your camera when you're in there, there's a little like concentric circles icon. If there's a line through it, it means live view is off. If you click on it, it'll turn live view on. Then after you've taken a picture in live view, go to it in your camera roll. And at least, like I said, I don't know if it's an iPhone model thing or an iOS thing. The old way to do it was you swiped up on the photo and then you would get options of like bounce and repeat and long exposure. And you just click on the long exposure option and it'll convert it for you. And then it'll stay that way until you take it off. But like I said, I have not yet, I only had my iPhone 13 for a few weeks, so I have not yet figured out how to do it. I just know that it's changed now on how you do that. Like the turning the live mode on and off works the same, but how you get to convert the photo afterwards has changed, and I haven't looked at the directions yet. So,
thank you.
All right, so photos to art. So I'm going to start off with some stuff that's a little bit more just taking some editing apps and not really just kind of playing with them versus really manipulating the photo. And then we'll get a little bit crazier as we go on. So this is straight editing. I did this one all in Snapseed, if I recall correctly. Yeah, I will also apologize. I'm trying to put on here the apps that I used for these images, but in some cases I don't remember all of them because they were ones that I did a while ago. And there are also ones, most of the time I've probably used Snapseed or Lightroom on just about everything. And what I'm mentioning on the slides is sort of what I consider like the primary app that gave the main effects that you're seeing in the picture, but there were probably other ones at work as well. So this one, like I said, I'm pretty sure I just used Snapseed on this one. The original photo, I mean, you could see there's some like purples and blues. They're just very subdued. And this was some barnacles on a piece of rotting wood out in the Carquinez Strait. And I'm like, I thought it looked cool. And I'm like, well, I wonder what happens if I like play with the saturation and bring out those colors. And I wasn't trying to be realistic. Obviously, the photo on the right looks nothing like, what the actual piece of wood looked like, but it turns it into like this cool kind of modern art painting. And I think in hindsight, I kind of want to get rid of like the fishing line thing that's here. So I would probably go back in with retouch and take that out because I'm not sure that it really adds to the photo. It feels more like a distraction now that I'm sitting here staring at it for a little bit longer. But again, this was just, basically editing and playing with the saturation to turn it into something, a little more fantastical than what it was in real life. This one I actually just took about a week ago. My sister was visiting and we went over to San Francisco and did a long walk through the Presidio. And you could see the fogs are blowing through these pine trees along the coast. And I took the picture. I mean, that's what you see on the left was the original photo that I took. And I mean, it's not bad as it is. You can see a little bit of the fog through the trees, but I didn't feel like it really captured the mood that I was feeling because it was, kind of chilly and, fog drifting through the trees, a little bit spooky. And so I wanted to bring that out a little bit more. So the main app that I used here was Distressed FX, which it's an app that has a lot of different like textures and filters that you can apply to your photos. And so that's what gives it sort of the bluish color hue. I think I might have also played around in Lightroom with this one and used a little bit of did a negative dehaze to add a little bit more fogginess across the trees before I took it into Distressed FX. But anyway, as you can see, I'm a lot about, how was I feeling? Like, how was I sort of seeing a scene, not necessarily like the reality of what the scene looked like. Because I think, it really captures that spooky, sort of chilly, foggy atmosphere when you do the extra stuff to the photo, even though it's not exactly what it looked like in real life anymore. This was kind of a fun one. The original photo I actually took with Blurristic. I think you can see there's a little bit of like blurriness around the trees and the grass. That's because I used that Blurristic app to take the photo in the first place. But then I'm like, oh, the colors aren't very fun, it just doesn't really pop. So there's this app called Pinkle, which it does one and only one thing. Really, it has a couple of different filters, but it kind of gives you the effect of a color infrared photo. Except obviously the original photo was not infrared. And while I've figured out how to do good black and white infrared on the iPhone, I have not figured out how to do good color infrared on the iPhone. I don't know if it's possible. So Pinkle is my app if I want to fake it that I did a color infrared image. And it also, just kind of spices up the landscape here and makes it a little more interesting with the pinks and oranges rather than the greens. This one, I've got a few examples from Chicago. I think there's a lot of Chicago pictures, mainly because I had done the presentation out of Chicago. So I'm like, oh, I should throw in a few things that I did from Chicago. So that's why you'll see a few of those in here. But I was there on a business trip in January, and as you can see, it snowed and it was kind of cold, and Chicago in January. I was up on the top of the Hancock building taking pictures, but I'm like, it's a nice photo, but it's just kind of blah. And so there's an app called Prisma that has a lot of cool different, it's an artificial intelligence thing. And I mean, it's got some of the simple ones, like, oh, you can kind of make it look like a Van Gogh painting, those sorts of things. But it's got tons and tons and tons and tons of these filters that you can apply. And so I think I did a couple different ones and blended them together here. I felt like the purples and pinks kind of gave that sort of cold, frosty atmosphere, but it just made it a little more colorful and welcoming, I thought, versus the original photo. Chicago in January really needs some color. So this one, I'll also talk a little bit in the inspiration about how I don't like to just take the same picture that everybody else took. And granted, I don't know how many people venture out to Navy Pier when it's 20 below zero and take pictures of the Ferris wheel. But, the first picture, again, there's 10,000 pictures out there of the Navy Pier Ferris wheel. It's winter, it's kind of gray and blah. And so I played around mostly in Colorama, which I'll talk about the apps when I get to the end of this section, just for those of you who are curious. I'll talk a little bit more about them. But Colorama has a ton of different filters, and you can play with different blending modes. And that's how I was able to get these two different versions of it with these very different colors. So it's this gives you more of that, still feels like it's winter in Chicago, but it's just a little bit cool and a little bit more surreal. And here it's just the complete opposite. It's fiery and warm and not at all like what it looked like the day that I was there, but it was kind of fun anyway. This one, so I actually did not take this original photo, disclaimer, this was an old family photo, which I liked. I think I took a photo of the photo with my iPhone and then I touched it up a little bit so that you could actually see Grandpa a little bit. But then there's this app called Snapdot that, as you can see, it does exactly that. It puts dots in there. And I was able to take this picture of my grandpa with his pipe in his mouth. And now it kind of looks like a pop art, movie star poster kind of thing. So I thought that was, I don't usually do people, but I thought this was an interesting thing to try. This was kind of a fun one. The inspiration here is over the course of a year or two, I had biked across 3 different bridges in the Bay Area. And I took pictures. Obviously, it's I always have my phone with me when I'm on my bike rides. And so I took photos. I took photos as I was crossing each of the 3 bridges. And then I'm like, well, wouldn't it be fun to kind of blend those together into one picture? And so I did that. And as you can see, I played with the blending modes a little bit to get, the colors are a little bit funky, not really like what the originals were, but it's, kind of a neat picture of 3 different Bay Area bridges all melted together.
Let me get you to go back there for a second.
Sure.
How did you get all 3 of those photos into one photo?
So Colorama lets you layer things on top of each other. Okay. So, I don't remember which one I started with, but basically I took each picture and then I layered the next one in. I played with the blending modes to get it how I wanted it. Then I added the 3rd one in.
Okay. Thank you. Because I was going to kick myself for not asking, because this is probably my favorite. And I thought I had favorites two or 3 slides ago, but this is my new favorite. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll talk about that a little bit. I have a slide on some of the apps I use, and I'll talk just a little bit about each of them too. Okay. But yeah, Colorama is one of these, and I'm going to apologize to the Android people because Colorama is not available for Android. And I don't know if there's anything. I mean, there are other things you can use to layer stuff, but it's a very impressive program. I'll just leave it at that for now, and we'll talk about it more in a minute. And this one, so I mean, the spiral staircase on its own is pretty cool here, but there's this app called Photospiralysis that spiralizes things. And so I used that along with Colorama. So I spiralized it, and then I played with the blending modes to get the colors different. And for some reason, it reminds me of Dante's Inferno. So I'm like, okay, yeah, but it ended up sort of cool. So a few tips that I have, and some of this will make more sense after I talk a little bit about the apps, but play around. So there's like a billion apps out there. And honestly, like I have, if you look on my iPad, it's like I have the ones that I use a lot, I have organized into like folders so I can find them easily. Then I have just like pages of ones that I've downloaded and haven't had time to play with yet. And it's on my list. And so I do, every now and then I'll feel like, oh, I just want to play with something new. So let me play with some of these other apps. If they don't do anything for me, then I delete them. There's some that I'm like, maybe. And so I hang on to it for a while and try and decide if I have a use for it. So I would encourage you to play around, because I like certain apps. You may find you like different ones than I do, depending on what looks you're going for and what you're trying to do. A lot of them do cost money. They're usually not super expensive, but a lot of them do have like a free trial or something that you can do first. So a lot of the time you don't necessarily have to pay up front. I think there are a few that you might. But again, they're so much more affordable, versus the hundreds of dollars that you used to have to spend for desktop software.
And let me interrupt real quick. There was a question, because you're talking about it now. Darlene was curious, are you noticing that a lot of these apps are going to subscriptions instead of just a few dollars to buy them right out?
There's a few, not too many yet. I mean, I feel like more are heading that way. Out of the ones that I use, Prisma is the only one that's a subscription model. And even there, like there's a free version. You just don't get as many filters, and you can't do like a high resolution version of it. But yeah, I do. Oh, and of course the Lightroom, of course, has the subscription, and always has, as long as I've been using it, at least. So yeah, so I feel like there are some of them do, some of them don't. I feel like I've seen a few switch. But I think that's unfortunately probably the future. And that's where there's some where I'm like, I don't really love this app enough to pay a subscription fee. Like I would have paid $5.99 to have it just all at once, but I don't want to pay for it every month. And so then I'll either like find an alternative, or I'll just only use the free version with whatever limitations it comes along with. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of those subscription models. I mean, I can totally see why the app people want to do it that way.
Sure.
So some apps are like super versatile, and I'll talk about this a little bit more on the next slide. There are others that may only do one thing, or maybe there's only one thing that you really like it for, but they do it really well and nobody else really does it. And so I call those my one-trick ponies. They're the ones that like, hey, I really only use them for one thing, but I really need them for that one thing. As you're working on these things, as you're playing around, I always sort of follow this rule, like don't just apply one effect at 100% and leave it that way, or do one like painted version of a photo and leave it as is. Because to me, that doesn't feel like my artwork. That feels like the app developer's artwork. Then at that point, it's like their artificial intelligence that created it. And so what I like to do is, tone down the effects a little bit, layer multiple ones together, or I'll make like 20 different painted versions in Prisma, for example, and then layer several of them together at different opacities until it's something that I feel like is my creation, not theirs. And it's like, yes, I use these tools to get there, but it's not like, oh, I'm just clicking the Van Gogh button on this app and that's it. I don't like doing that. But, if you're just out there, if you're in a creative rut and you just want to kind of play around, like go push that Van Gogh button and see what happens. There's nothing wrong with that. This is just my preference as I'm trying to create art. I feel like I want to have my own touch on it versus just what somebody else. And I also don't want people to be able to look at a photo of mine and say, oh, I know exactly what filter she used on exactly what app. Trying to make it something more people are like, how did she do that? I don't know. Experimenting with blending modes. So this is something I'll talk about again on the next page when we talk about apps, but there are lots of different blending modes. If those of you who use Photoshop are probably familiar with them, you probably stick with the ones that give you more realistic effects in Photoshop when you're editing normal photos, but play with some of the crazy ones, when you're trying to do this type of work. If you remember the orange navy Pier Ferris wheel, it's like that was with, different blending modes. that, get those crazy colors. And I think my top tip is just remember, like, once you start doing this, it's like, it's not reality anymore. It's not really like a photograph of the Navy Pier Ferris wheel. It's a piece of art. And so nobody is ever going to look at those photos or those images of mine and say, oh, that looks just like the Navy Pier Ferris wheel. And that wasn't my intention. And so you're not being deceptive here. This isn't like the person who like photoshopped something to try and fool people into thinking they were at the Eiffel Tower when they were really in their backyard in Los Angeles or something. This is like, you're not even pretending this is real. So, feel free if there's stuff in the image that you don't like, edit it out. Feel free to mess around with colors. So just like do whatever, because you're not bound by reality anymore. You're just bound by like what you like and what your creative vision is. So now for my apps. So I'll be on this slide for a minute or two so that anybody who wants to, take a screenshot or whatever can. Again, there's a bazillion, and I use even more than what's on this slide, but these are some of the ones that I find myself coming back to a fair amount. So Colorama is probably the #1 program I use for making art. And between it and Snapseed, I remember earlier I said if I could only have one app to do stuff with, it would really be one of those two. So Colorama, basically, it has a lot of different features all kind of built in. So it has the ability to like layer different photos. That's how when I was talking about blending modes, like you can stack, you can have a photo, then you can stack another photo on top of it. You can play with blending modes. You can bring in a third one on top of that. It has masking. It has all these sorts of things for just blending photos together. But then it also has various painting effects. And it's just got like a ton of tools. The developer just added a bunch of new things like smoke and bokeh and all sorts of effects that you can add to your photos. I probably have not even like explored the half of what it has to offer. My one word of warning on it, like I said, it's not available for Android, sorry. It's also a little bit pricier, although I think she recently introduced a like try it out before you have to pay for it kind of thing. So I'd encourage you to try the free version. She has at least not yet gone to a subscription model, so hopefully she won't. But it is not an intuitive program. It is not easy to use. I did a class on iPhone photography where the instructor went over a little bit of how to use Colorama. And so that helped me get started. But definitely, if you want to use it, definitely get some YouTube videos. There's definitely tutorials and things out there, but just don't, you're not going to just be able to like dive in and know what you're doing with it, because it is very much, it's one downside is it's not intuitive at all. Snapseed, again, does a lot of things. You can actually layer photos on top of each other in Snapseed as well. It's called double exposure. And then, it's got fewer blending modes than what Colorama has, but it still has some. It's also got some effects that you can do. I mean, it's got a number of different filters for like different kinds of black and white photos. It's got like this grunge mode that lets you add sort of like this dirty, it's got like 5,000 different grunge filters that you could apply. So it's actually got a lot of features that I think a lot of people don't take advantage of if you're just using it for basic editing. It goes so much beyond that as well. Painting effects. So there's a lot of apps out there. These are my favorites. So Waterlog, really, it only does watercolors, but it does really nice watercolors. And so I find myself like there's a number of other like watercolor apps out there, and the other painting apps also do watercolor, but I find Waterlog usually gives me the effects that I like the best. Picasso and Brushstroke are two good ones. They both have a variety of like the oil paint looks and watercolor looks and, a bunch of different painting styles that you can apply. So I find that they've got just a lot of options there. I believe Picasso is the one that also has like a magic mode where you can do like the Van Gogh or, mimicking different famous artists kind of thing. Prisma is one. This is the one of the very few that I actually paid the subscription fee for, and I'm always debating like, do I really use it enough that I, want to keep paying the subscription? And so far, I do. Again, it's one of these ones, it has certain styles, but it just has a bazillion of them if you've paid for it. If you don't want to pay, if you don't want to pay for the subscription, then you're limited to like a very small number of filters that you can apply. But it just gives, I mean, it's sort of the thing where you have to like get in there and play with it and see what it does for you. And each photo is different. Like a filter that I really like on one photo, I might like something completely different. So I'll just sit there. It's a very relaxing activity to do while I'm watching the TV. It's like I'll load in a photo and then I'll just like flip through all the 100 filters, and anytime I come across one I like, I'll save it and then I can blend them together later. So it's a very fun app to play with. But again, the downside is it's the subscription. Textures and filters. So Mextures and Distressed FX are both ones that I really like. I find Mextures is a little bit more subtle, I think, and Distressed FX has a little bit more of a texture component to it versus I think Mextures is a little bit more color based. But they're both very good apps to play with. I would say I probably use Distressed FX a little bit more than Mextures, but they're both good. And then Pixlr is one, I use it for one and only one thing. It has like a whole bunch of filters as well, but it has this cool one where it inverts photos. So I do this a lot with my black and white photos where I'll invert it. So stuff that was white now becomes black and vice versa. It does it with color too, but sometimes that looks just a little bit weird. But I like doing it with my black and white. And it's the only app that I found that lets you do that like super easily. So even though I don't use any of its other filters, I do use that one. Photo spiralysis. So these are my one trick ponies, the things that kind of only do one thing, but I really like what they do. So I use them. So the photo spiralysis, like I said, it does the spiralizing and it's got a whole bunch of controls. So you can spiralize things in a lot of different ways, but that's really basically all it does is the spirals. Reflect does just what it says, creates a reflection. So it's got a whole bunch of different types of water and mirrors and things that you can use to reflect into, but it's kind of a cool effect. Snapdot, you already saw in the photo of Grandpa, where it turns your photo into like a dot drawing. And then Pinkler, like I said, I use that. It's got a couple of different filters, but they're all in that, like trying to make it look sort of like a color IR photo. So that's kind of fun in that way.
I'm going to sneak in a question because
Sure.
I'm sitting here kind of nodding with you, Mika. Her question is, maybe it's a statement. I'd have such a hard time knowing when to stop trying filters, trying new filters and new effects. How do you stop yourself from continuously experimenting? How do you know when you're done?
You don't. Well, see, this is one of the things, this is one of the reasons why I don't like doing art on paper, because like once you've painted something, you can't unpaint it. The beautiful thing about these is, and I would say like, if you're at a point and you like it, like save a copy to your camera roll. So you keep that. And then if you mess with it and ruin it, you still have that version that you kept. Depending, like if you're all within one app, you can usually undo what you did if you don't like it. But if you've like messed with it in a few different apps and you're like, oh no, I want to go back to like 4 versions ago, make sure like anytime there's something on your screen that you're like, ooh, I really like that, just save it. You can always delete it later if you end up coming up with something better. But I would say like, as you're learning, like just play around. I mean, there's really no right answer. It's all about what you like. And there are some nights where it's like, I do just sit there and I play around endlessly with one photo and never get anywhere. and then there are nights where it's like, I sort of have a vision in my head and I know which apps are going to give me the look I want. And then I can be more focused and I can make exactly what I'm looking for. But there are some nights where it's nice. I'll just be sitting in front of the TV and I'll just like play around. And, I have some stuff on my iPad now where it's like, I'd started on it and I've got like 5 different versions of something and I need to figure out what direction I'm going to go. And I haven't figured it out yet. So.
Are all of these apps, it seems like there are some apps you can use on iPad and there's some apps that are only iPhone, or are these interchangeable?
Most of them are. So there's iColorama S, which is the phone version, and iColorama without the S is the iPad version. Snapseed, I think you download it once, it'll work on either one. Most of them I think work on either one. There's Distressed FX is the other one where it might have a separate phone versus iPad app. But I think most of them, it's the same for the phone versus the iPad.
And you may have said this, but I think I read it too. Are you doing most of your editing on your iPad?
Yes, I like the bigger screen. So I think that the class I went to where I started learning some of this stuff, he was doing it all on iPhone. And I just found the screen too small. And, I'm getting older and it's like my eyes aren't as good as they used to be. And I just like having the bigger control. I also like using my Apple Pencil sometimes for some edits. And so obviously that's only on the iPad. Like you can get a stylus for the iPhone, but to me, it just doesn't give you the control or anything that the pencil does. So yeah, I do it all on my iPad, mainly for that reason. It's just easier. But like I said, a lot of these I think are available for the phone as well.
Perfect, thank you.
All right, so the last section here, I'm going to just talk a little bit about some of the ways that I get inspired. Some of these ways might work for you, some of them might not. You might have other things, but just wanted to throw out some ideas there. So the first one, I've already talked about this a little bit, about trying to put your own unique spin on something. So like, hey, this is back from this was the sunny day when I was in Chicago in January. Everyone has a photo like this of the bean or something, a photo very similar. I'm sure like any of you who've been to Chicago and seen the bean, like you've got this photo probably.
Yes.
So
many of them.
Yes. Oh, I have many of them too, but it's not very unique. Like if I posted this on Instagram, like it would be like, oh yeah, I've seen 5 million of those photos already, like not very exciting. So then, you can get a little bit more interesting. So I got up closer and, you're just taking an up close shot of like a little part of the bean, and you get some interesting things with the people and everything like that. And you're like, okay, that's kind of cool. But there's still probably, like, if you went out on Instagram, there's probably some people that have those photos of the bean because all I did was stand closer to the thing. It wasn't like remarkably creative. But then in the third photo here, I took, and it wasn't exactly, it was a similar image to the second one, probably not that exact one, but I took it, I played with the colors, I played with the textures a little bit, and it turns into something, if you look at that, you might not necessarily know that was the bean right away if you hadn't seen me show these other photos to you already. Right. So it just gives it something very different, and probably nobody else has that exact photo of the bean. So if I were to post that on Instagram, it would be a little bit more unique. I like imitating other art forms. Like sometimes I'll just get these wacky ideas. So it's like I'd done an acrylic pouring class sometime before COVID, don't remember how long ago. And it was kind of fun. And then I saw someone had like a YouTube tutorial on how to use this app called MetaBrush, which I had. It's one of the ones I don't use super often, but I do use it for this. To sort of mimic the acrylic pour. So I'm like, okay, that's kind of cool. And then at the same time, for some reason, I was thinking back to like my childhood, like in grade school. I don't know if any of you had those like scratch boards where there was like colors underneath and black on top, and you like scratched it off and it makes a drawing when you basically etch away the black to show the color. And so I'm like, oh, what if I could like combine those? So I had this lovely photo of a tree that I took at a park in Walnut Creek, turned it black and white to make it more dramatic. And then I did this, like, I don't know what photo I started with for this one that looks like an acrylic pour, because it doesn't look like a photo anymore. But basically I took the black and white photo of the tree, I put the acrylic pour thing underneath it. And with Snapseed, I used the masking tool to like just basically outline parts of the tree to get the purple color to show through and leave the rest of it in the black and white. So it kind of gives that effect of the sgraffito, scratch board sort of thing. But again, it was just these random thoughts that collided in my head, and I had this vision. And then when I took this picture of this tree, I'm like, oh, this would be perfect for me to try this on. So, and I did. I get inspired a lot by like my favorite books and movies. So this was a couple years ago, the last wet winter we had in California in like 2017 or so. And I was up near Lake Berryessa in Napa, and there was this flooded creek, and there was this old, it's not a willow tree, I'm sure it's an oak tree because that's all we have around here, it seems like. But there was this old tree like hanging over this flooded creek, and it just made me think of Old Man Willow from the Lord of the Rings books. But the photo, like as it is, it doesn't really look exactly like Old Man Willow. It doesn't have that sort of fantasy atmosphere to it, but I was able to take it and edit it. And this is one where I tortured this photo in so many apps. I don't even remember all of them. I know I used Lightroom on it. I know I used Snapseed. It looks like I probably used Distressed FX, but I don't remember all the details. But I finally managed to get this image that brought to life sort of that fantasy element from the books. This was actually for a contest in this abstract art and photography group that I belong to on Facebook. And we were supposed to illustrate a song. And I had taken some photos of these cool guitars at an exhibit I saw in Phoenix once. And so I thought of the song While My Guitar Gently Weeps. And so I'm like, okay, how do I make the guitar weep? So I used the Reflect app to give it the water reflection. And then there's this cool thing called Sort in Colorama, which basically like creates these like vertical lines coming down from everything. And so I, did that. And then I like masked it to get the guitar back and only leave the weeping part on this area of the photo to look like it was kind of weeping down into the water. This one, imitation is Sarah's form of flattery. So it's like, there's a lot of artists that I love. And anytime when I took this picture of the calla lilies, like you just automatically think of Georgia O'Keeffe because she did a lot of flowers like that in her paintings. And so here, I'm pretty sure I did a couple of Prisma versions here and blended them together. I'm not 100% positive on that, but I'm pretty sure it was Prisma. But it gives a look, more similar to what Georgia O'Keeffe's paintings looked like. And then this photo, I took it at one of the wineries that I belong to up in Napa. It reminded me of a Seurat painting, the one of the Saturday afternoon on the island where you've got the people with their little parasols and stuff walking around. And it totally reminded me of that. And so I used Snapdot and Waterlog, the watercolor app, to make a sort of pointillist version of the photo. And that was it. So I'll leave this up here for a minute. So where to find me. So again, Instagram, I've listed my website there. The website exists, but I haven't really done anything with it yet. And I promise I will someday. I'm hoping maybe I'll have some time over the holidays this year to work on that. And then, feel free to email me. Like if you have a question about any of the apps or anything like that we aren't able to get to tonight, do feel free to email me. I'm always happy to answer questions, or feel free to message me on Instagram, whatever way is easiest for you. But
sounds great. Thank you so much, Liz. Okay, so I'm going to get you to take your screen down. So my first comment is exactly what Paul Malinowski is saying in the chat. He says, it was so nice to hear more than 7 minutes of your presentation. And that is exactly how I felt when Paul finished with his presentation last week, because I understand what they were doing. They were just trying to give you guys an opportunity to inspire other people and to see the kind of work, the attendees were doing. And 7 minutes was great, but I remember at the end of his, I'm like, that's it? I want more. I wasn't done with Paul. So I was super happy to have him. And then I think you were after him. And I was just like, oh my God, she's just doodling and playing, but you're creating art. And it's digital art. Art is art. And so my question to you is, do you have an art background? Because you do, you kind of like played with colors, and you have a very impressionistic flavor to your art, which is what my favorite type of art is. I'm a huge Claude Monet fan, and so where does your creativity come from? Do you have art background that you want to own up to?
No art background. I took a couple art classes in high school. That was about it. My mother is very talented, so I like to think it's like good genetics probably. But I mean, my degree is in science, and I do marketing now. So I mean, I guess marketing is a little more creative than science, but never really took art classes. I have taken some photography classes over the last couple of years, just because, again, I feel like I've become, even though I do all this digital art, I feel like taking photography classes, I always learn something new. And I feel like being a better photographer helps me then be a better artist on the back end. So, I think any artistic talent, et cetera, I think I inherited from my mother. My dad is also very musical, so maybe something from there as well, but I attribute it to genetics rather than training.
Well, yeah. So would you let them know that it funneled down to you? Because I'm sitting here being very envious of I don't allow myself to play. Mostly I don't have time, but I'm sitting here thinking, God, I'm going to have to download a few of these apps, because I do like to travel, and I do spend a lot of time in an airport. And this would be kind of a good way to, instead of zone out, I could kind of fiddle and be productive and allow myself to play. And then I can hit delete because nobody needs to see it if it doesn't turn out.
You never know, you might create something wonderful. But no, I mean, I don't like to just sit and watch TV. It's like I enjoy TV programs, but I can't just watch TV. So
Right.
I always have to be doing something. And so it's like, rather than playing games on my phone while I watch TV, it's like I'll dabble with this stuff. So I'll sit there while I'm watching TV and work on a piece of art. So.
Yeah. So there's quite a few nice messages in here for you. And I always share the chat with the presenters because I just want you to see the comments that you generate and the work that you're producing has gotten a lot of people excited. There was one in here that Mika, I think we're twins because sometimes she says things and I just go, she says very inspiring, and that is very true. But the word she uses is liberalizing. And I don't, like I said, I don't let myself play and just kind of watching this process, especially I love those trees. And there's quite a few people in this room that have photographed fields of trees. And Felicia, I hope you're listening. I think that'd be kind of cool to see if you can pull that off with your apps and try something different, because there's quite a few people in here that strictly use their iPhone. And it was nice to see a handful of them jump in because I've not really attended any other of the presentations. And I think this one just kind of caught their attention and got them excited that finally Linda's doing something for me for once.
Yeah, and I guess one thing I would add though, too, if you're not an iPhone person and you don't want to use your phone, like the apps, I mean, some of the photos that I start with, I do have my other cameras too. And it's like, I don't discriminate. It's like, if I like a photo, I'll take a photo that I took with my regular camera and I'll put it on my iPad and I'll play with it too. I just find, more and more, I don't even bother taking the regular camera with me a lot of places anymore. But, so if you only have the regular camera and that's what you're comfortable with, but you want to dabble with some of this, like there's no reason you can't. If you want to do it on the computer, even if you've got Photoshop, I know they've got some new filters and things, which honestly, Photoshop on the desktop I've used like once and it still frightens me. So I don't use it very much.
Don't feel bad. It frightens me too. You're not alone. And
yeah. And then Topaz Studio has a lot of like interesting artistic filters. So if you are more of a like desktop laptop computer editor, you can still do fun things. Like those programs have those capabilities too. So
well, I don't see any other questions in the chat, and I'm going to say thank you for coming to do this. And not to put you on the spot, but to put you on the spot, would you consider maybe doing another presentation? Maybe, I don't know what, but I want you to come back or think about coming back, because this was kind of fun. And I really enjoyed it. And based on some of the comments in here, I was not the only one. It's not the only one.
I'm glad people got something out of it. And thank you so much for asking me to join you here. This was a lot of fun.
And I think her name was Marjorie, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it or saw it wrong. I can't find it back in the chat, but there was a comment in here. She actually saw you at the Out of Chicago presentation. And so I know, hopefully, if she's still in this room, I think it was Marjorie, that you'll agree that 7 minutes was not long enough. So this is great.
Yeah, it was super hard trying to come up with the 7-minute presentation that actually told people anything. I mean, it was harder to prepare that presentation than it was to do this longer version of it for sure. So.
Well, I think when you did that, you hit us really hard with images, and I was like, oh my gosh, she did that on an iPhone. Oh my gosh, she did this with her mobile phone. And you couldn't go through all these apps or as many apps and maybe just kind of the techniques or the thought process behind it. But this, like we talked about, is I like to give people, your name is on this, and it gives a very nice, comprehensive presentation. So hopefully you're happy with it, because I'm thrilled with it, because I don't know if there's anything missing. So and I just want more, because I like your images, and I'd like to see I'd like to see you get your website up. That's just a
Yes.
selfish thing on my part. So maybe by the next time you're here, we'll have a website and we'll have an about page. So it'll be easier for us to stalk you.
Yes.
All right,
Yes.
Liz, thank you so much for coming and doing this. I truly appreciate it.
Oh, you're
You
very
guys-
welcome. Like I said,
yeah.
thank you for inviting me.
Oh my gosh,
And
I'm
definitely happy to come back. So.
Oh, good, because I'm going to hold you to that. You guys can connect with Liz on Instagram at Liz Crane Art. And our last session of the year is scheduled for December 15th. And it seems like it's very far away, but it really isn't. So instead of having a speaker, what I thought I would do, it'd be fun for us, is have you, the audience, anybody that's been attending, or if this is your first time to attend, or if you've made it to every one of the sessions, if you would like to share one of your images and maybe a story of the behind the shot, how you created it, what inspired you, or maybe there was a speaker that inspired you that was part of the happiness hour. That would be kind of cool to hear, because I know that everybody's creating images and not everybody gets the opportunity to share them. And I'm offering that to you. So if you'd like to participate, and Liz, you can come back and do one too. So if you'd like to participate, send a message to me at cousinlinda@gmail.com and I'll add you to the list. And spoiler alert, quite a few people have already been added to my list. So next week, Kathy Chassie will be here to present storytelling through nature photography. So until next time, go out and create something beautiful. And I hope that we see you again soon.